Hello and good morning and welcome back to the Nordic Pavilion here in Glasgow. Today is the day of the parliamentarians, and we have many parliamentarians in place here in Glasgow and at the Nordic Pavilion. I'm very, very glad for that. We have many other guests as well as every day during these past weeks. We have today a day totally planned and run by the Nordic Council, and we have a very interesting program. So please, all of you out there and all of you here and all of you in Helsinki, stay tuned. We are, as I briefly mentioned, connected to the Nordic Hub in Helsinki today. We're going to be in close dialogue with them during this whole day. But before we continue with our program, both here and in Helsinki, I'm going to tell you about an illustrator, Mr. Joonas Lehtimäki, that we have with us during this whole day. He will be documenting the events as they go along, and throughout the day's program we will check in with him to take part of his drawings as we progress. The name of this event is Awareness Without Action is Worthless, Political Commitment to Climate Change Action. My name is Merje Strin. I am Head of Communications at the Nordic Council, and I will be moderating here in Glasgow. And we have a moderator also in Helsinki. Annika, are you there? And would you like to say a quick hello?
Yes, thank you, Mary, and hello
now I
from
need
Helsinki.
my headphones.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you when I put on my headphones.
Yes.
Very nice to see you there. And you will listen to us here, and I will give the floor now to Annette Lind, who up till a couple of days ago was the Vice President of the Nordic Council. You still are. Yeah. Please, Annette.
Thank you.
Yes, of course you are. It's next year that it turns over to your successor. So Annette, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here to the COP26 in Scotland. It's a great honor for me as Vice President of the Nordic Council until next year to greet you welcome to the Nordic Council Day here in this pavilion. And very welcome to the people in Helsinki, in Finland as well. The Nordic Council is the official body for the formal interparliamentarian operation in the Nordic region. I think you know that we are 8 countries in the Nordic Council in the Nordic region. We are Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and then we have Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Åland. Yeah. And we are the former body of the Nordic Council. It's formed in 1952 and it has 87 members. The work of parliamentarians is centered around transparency and openness, gives the public insight into governance and critical decision making. The Nordic Council works in similar ways. This is also why we have organized a joint program here today with the people in Helsinki to the Nordic Climate Action Week, a hub in Helsinki which offers the public access to COP26. We have experts here, we have young people, and we have parliamentarians during today. The Nordic Council of Ministers launched the first pavilion in UN Climate Summit in 2015 in Paris. Since then, the Nordic cooperation has been hosting similar pavilions in Marrakesh, Bonn, Katowice and Madrid. The Nordic Council has asked to be part in the Nordic Pavilion here today during this time with the proposal to engage parliamentarians, ministers, youth experts and other stakeholders in decisions on climate mitigation and adaptation. The pavilion is an important meeting and even event venue for promoting Nordic climate solutions and sustainability publicity internationally. It is it's hard for me to speak English. It is a place where the people meet, discuss, build partnerships and friendships across regions and globally. Since 2015 in Copenhagen, there has been growing understandings in critical roles that legislatures at all levels have to play in tackling the climate and crisis. Climate change and the loss of biodiversity are the biggest challenges of our time. The climate change has loss of biodiversity. We must act, and we must act fast, involving all actors and all levels and parts of our societies. Scientists warn that the humans are running out of time to curb greenhouse gas emissions and avoid catastrophic global warming. Global climate change in acceleration and human-caused emissions of greenhouse gases as overwhelming cause, according to the latest Ipcc report, which is we will hear more about in a minute. There can be no doubt that zero carbon world is possible, but we have choices about how we manage the transition. In the global energy transition, it is important that ensure a fair, just transition that enables opportunities for all. While governments can commit to targets, action and spend only their parliaments are mandated to the people of a country to hold them accountable to commitments and to make the necessary laws. Parliaments represent the people by articulation the view of citizens in decision-making processes. Parliaments can be said to the bedrock of the representative democracies, and it plays a unique and vital role, and no other institution in a representative democracy can replace. I'm proud to be Vice President of the Nordic Council and to take a part of scrutinizing overseas and holding governments in the Nordic region accountable to challenge the work through questioning ministers and through debating. I'm excited about this day's program because we bring the role of parliaments and the voices of the young people to the forefront of the climate discussion. Due to the COVID-19 restrictions, we are unfortunately not able to move closer. We can be in spirit, but we must comply with restriction and keep safety protocols. And please do so today. Despite the unusual situation, I'm confident that we will have a very inspiring day here in this pavilion, and we will have good discussions. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to see many of you throughout the day. Welcome to this pavilion.
Now it is time for us to turn over to Helsinki and to the Speaker of the Finnish Parliament, Mrs. Anu Vehviläinen. Anu, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
There, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the Nordic Climate Action Weeks, of course, here in Helsinki and also, of course, all you are in Glasgow today. A warm welcome to the Nordic Council's day during the Nordic Climate Action Weeks here at the Nordic Culture Point in Helsinki. Welcome also to those of you who are taking part in Glasgow at UN Climate Summit COP26. Most of today's program is organized jointly with COP26. Nordic Climate Action Weeks in Helsinki is designed to open a back door of COP26 in Glasgow. This offers an opportunity for us to join experts and decision makers who participate in climate negotiations and discussion. The program of today is broad, covering political level, local communities, civil society, and the youth. Tackling climate change is very much a question of justice and fairness for the future generation. Thank you to Nordic Council for organizing this important event. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all entitled to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We have high hopes for the Glasgow Summit, that necessary pledges will be made to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. But pledges are not enough. If there are no concrete policies, financing, and regulations to implement them. I was pleased that so far 2 nuclear pledges backed up with funding were made, namely to end and reverse deforestation by 2030 and reduce emission from methane by 30% by 2030. In the Nordic countries, we are in many respects forerunners when it comes to clean environment and ambitious climate goals. In Finland, for instance, our goal is to become carbon neutral by 2035. And indeed, in the north, it is easy to see that urgent actions are needed. Temperatures in the Arctic region are rising 3 times more rapidly than the global average. When ice melts in the Arctic, the effect will be global. Despite our position as climate action leaders, we too have challenges in rapidly reducing greenhouse gases. We have a cold climate and a long tradition of energy-intensive industries. In addition, we have long transportation distances to reach our export markets. The task ahead of us is great, but by no means impossible. Technological innovations will offer us solutions for a cleaner and greener future. The benefits of this are twofold: less greenhouse gas emissions and bigger markets for companies in the green and circular economy. We have seen how a single technological innovation may result in great benefits for the global environment. For example, by using green hydrogen, we can reduce the emissions of steel production to practically zero in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, parliamentarians are in a key position when it comes to steering the society towards a more environmentally friendly future. Parliament's mandate to adopt new legislation and decide on budget are powerful tools when promoting the use of sustainable energy solutions, supporting green transition and circular economy. By these tools, it is also possible to strengthen participatory democracy that guarantees everyone's right to influence on decisions that concern their own living environment. It is also important to strengthen environmental thinking in economic policies worldwide. By co-sharing the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, Finland aims for integrating climate action into national budgeting and economic policy planning. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to have everyone on board with this effort for the common good. All levels of decision making will be important for a fair and effective process. And in democracies, all voices must be heard. The time to act decisively on climate change is now, just now. I wish you all interesting discussions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we turn back here to Glasgow. I hope you can see us here. Anu, I especially want to thank you for the last remarks you made. The time for action is really now. We will continue here with taking a look at the latest Ipcc report, and it is Oras Tynkkynen, the senior advisor at the sustainable solutions at Sitra in Finland, who will give us the overview of the report. Oras, you're welcome up here, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good to see so many old friends and a lot of new friends here as well. Actually, the last thing I did last night was to speak at the Nordic Pavilion, and the first thing I'm doing this morning is to speak at the Nordic Pavilion. So what I think I'll do next is just bring a sleeping bag and sleep here, so to make it a bit easier. I was asked to speak about the most recent Ipcc report that came out this summer. I should at the outset start by saying that I am not an Ipcc scientist. Why am I here nevertheless is that for my work I very often try to communicate the findings of science to layman audiences such as journalists and policymakers, and that's why I've also been looking at the Ipcc report. Now, most of you are probably very familiar with what the Ipcc is. I just wanted to give a bit of background because it does matter in this context. The Ipcc was formed already more than 30 years ago, so it has been operating for a really long time, and one of the primary functions of the Ipcc is to produce these very large, bulky assessment reports every 6 or 7 years or so. What these reports do, they do not produce any new original analysis or new original research. Instead, what they try to do is to compile all the best available scientific knowledge that is out there. So sometimes when you see news articles saying that the Ipcc research shows, well, the Ipcc doesn't do any research. It just puts together the best scientific knowledge that is available and out there. The second thing you might encounter sometimes is that people are saying to listen to the science, which I fully agree with, and then they come to the conclusion that science says that you need to reduce emissions by so and so. Well, that's not what the Ipcc does. The Ipcc is not policy prescriptive. The aim of the Ipcc is to inform policymakers and other decision makers, but how much to reduce emissions and how fast is very much a normative question. It's very much a political question rather than a natural sciences or a broader scientific question. The work of the Ipcc is carried out in 3 working groups, and the first one of those is looking at the physical science basis of climate change as a phenomenon, and that is what was released this summer, the first part of this very big 6th assessment report focusing on the physical science basis alone. A couple of figures perhaps on this report, because I think it helps in putting the report in context. If you are one of those unfortunate souls who spend time on Twitter following climate discussions there, you might get the impression that there are these random scientists that just say something and kind of pull it out of thin air. Now, that is not exactly the case. This one part of the bigger 6th assessment report by the Ipcc basically compiles 14,000 different scientific sources, peer-reviewed sources. And it is, in total, if you look at the full report, it's almost 4,000 pages. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the process is perfect and everything they say in the Ipcc report is perfectly right. But it is founded on a much stronger basis than what random dudes on Twitter say about what happens on climate change. So I would just very much encourage people to explore the wealth of knowledge that the Ipcc has put together whenever you have issues regarding the climate science. I should also say that this is the first part, looking at the physical science basis alone. It doesn't go into very much of the impacts of climate change in the future, nor does it look at emissions and how to tackle them. Those are the domain of the other working groups, and the reports by those working groups will be released later next year. Now, when this report was released, the UN Secretary General, who is not known for mincing his words, formulated that this is a code red for humanity. You can't find those words in the Ipcc report itself, but in all fairness, I think you could say that. If you read the report, I think you might come to the same conclusion as the UN Secretary General. The situation is really dire, and we need to take action really fast, so why not code red for humanity? Now, what I've tried to do is to distill the key messages of the report in 10. And of course, when we are talking about a 4,000-page report, there is very much more in there. But hopefully this will give a glimpse of what the IPCC has said. The first one is quite simply that the global heating that we have witnessed so far is unprecedented in many different ways. If you look at the concentrations of greenhouse gases that have been accumulated in the atmosphere, it is unprecedented in the scale of at least 2 million years. If you look at the observed heating of our climate system, that is unprecedented at the scale of hundreds of thousands of years. If you look at the climate impacts that we have witnessed in our system, that is again unprecedented for at least several thousands of years. The second message to take home from the report might be that humans have already heated the climate system by more than 1 degree. The average estimate is 1.1 degrees in the report. And whereas previously you had the discussion that, well, humans may play a certain role, but then you have all these natural factors that also are important. Now actually the 6th assessment report is saying that this observed heating is 100% caused by humans. So if you take into account various natural factors such as changes in solar radiation, you add them all together, you get to plus minus 0 degrees. So this is completely caused by us humans rather than different natural factors. We are already seeing the impact of this 1.1 degrees of global heating in various different ways. If you look at the Arctic sea ice coverage, if you look at sea level rise, if you look at the distribution of rainfall patterns, all these changes we are witnessing today. And why do I say that here is that if you go back 20 years and if you look at the IPCC reports at the time, the scientists could already say that this is what is likely to happen in the future, but there was not enough data to show that these changes were already taking place. We have the data now. We know that the climate system is changing throughout the world in various different ways. One thing that is also very new in the 6th assessment report compared to the previous ones is that now the scientists can very strongly make the link between individual extreme weather events and global heating. If you go again back in history, what the scientists were telling us was that, well, if you have an extreme weather event, be it a tornado or, torrential rainfall or drought, this fits nicely with what we are expected to see with global heating, but we can't with any certainty say that these two are actually linked. And for scientists, it is two different things to say that it might be true and it is true. Now what the IPCC is telling us that we can with certainty say that many of these extreme weather events we are witnessing today would not have happened without human-induced global heating. I think it's also important to acknowledge that even though we know so much more today than 10 or 20 years ago, there are also some unknowns in the climate system. For instance, we can't really spot a clear pattern regarding what happens with Antarctic ice mass. We don't really know whether it's decreasing or increasing. We don't have data really to come to any conclusions. And these unknowns, these uncertainties, unfortunately don't necessarily play in our favor. It might also mean that we have unknown things that will surprise us in very unfortunate ways in the future, and I will come back to that. Now, if you have been following the news coming out of Glasgow, you have noticed that there is a huge range of different temperature numbers given based on what countries have pledged regarding their 2030 nationally determined contributions as well as longer-term net zero targets. And we can talk why there is such a big range with those in a moment. But if you take a step back and if you just look at future projected heating of our climate system, based on the IPCC report, the message is still quite dire. What the IPCC is saying that we may be facing very large amounts of global heating in the future. And let me unpack that in two different ways. The first is, of course, that if we continue emitting large amounts of greenhouse gases, quite understandably, that is going to heat the climate system, and we are going to face a lot of problems with that. However, the second and less understood in at least public discourse factor is that we might also end up having a relatively low emission trajectory for the world. But the uncertainties might not play in our favor. You might end up with relatively good results with reducing global emissions and still have relatively large amounts of global heating. And I think this is important to acknowledge because many of these estimates about future heating are based on 50% target, 50% probability or 66% probability of staying within that certain temperature increase. It might happen that we get unlucky and we enter a 10% probability scenario and we end up having much more heating than we would have wanted. If I had to choose just one message from the sixth assessment report that really struck me, having read these reports over some time, was how irreversible many of these changes that we are inflicting on the planet today actually are. And that is not really something very new. However, it is very striking when you read the Ipcc report. Basically, for instance, the sea level rise that we are baking in the system with what we are doing today is going to continue for millennia into the future, even if we stop producing emissions tomorrow, which we are not doing, by the way. And it means that even if the world is successful in tackling the climate crisis, which I certainly hope we will be, people for generations and generations and generations to come will be bound by the choices we have made so far. There is no way to lower the sea level after we have started this process and after we have caused it to rise possibly by very large amounts. So it basically means that we and the previous generations are convicting future generations to a certain pathway in the future, a pathway that those generations That did not sound like Anders Tegnell for sure. So that really pains me, because we are condemning future generations to a future they can't change anymore. And I mean, it's one thing that we do something that is then hitting us back. But to say that we are condemning future generations to this very uncertain and unfavorable future, I think that causes me a lot of internal soul searching. Now, I did mention unwanted surprises, and I think again the sixth assessment report is in this sense more frank than some of the previous reports. For instance, coming from Finland, what is very important for us is the Gulf Stream, which is a certain segment of the broader ocean circulation patterns. And I remember writing a piece about the future of the Gulf Stream about 20 years ago, based on the knowledge that was available at the time. And I think then and also later, the conclusion was that it is highly unlikely that whatever we do with the climate system is going to abruptly change the Gulf Stream. Now what the Ipcc report is telling us actually is that we cannot exclude a scenario in which the Gulf Stream is abruptly disturbed. We talk about these low probability, high impact scenarios. They are low probability, thank goodness. But low probability doesn't mean zero probability. And if there's a 10% chance, if there's a 1% chance that Gulf Stream will abruptly change course, then that is really, really bad news for all of us who live in Nordic countries. Very importantly, what the Ipcc is saying very clearly is that every decision, every act still matters. And why that is the case? Well, first of all, the global heating we are going to witness is directly correlated with the amount of emissions we produce. So what that means in practice is that every single ton of emissions that we are able to prevent from reaching the atmosphere, every single ton will make global heating that much less damaging and devastating. And I think that's also one answer to all those people who are saying that, what about China? What does it matter what, a small country like Denmark does if there is China? Well, it matters because every single ton makes global heating less damaging and devastating for humanity. No matter whether it comes from Denmark, from Finland, from China, or from the US. And my final point that comes out from the IPCC report is that the future is still very much in our hands. There has been some debate about, this runaway climate change, that we wouldn't be able to stop global heating once it has reached a certain tipping point. What the IPCC is telling us, in fact, is that if we stop producing emissions, global heating will stop. It will take some time because there are time lags baked in the climate system, but it will stop. Which means that if we stop producing emissions, we will be able to tackle the climate crisis and avoid the devastation that this and other reports project will be ahead of us in the future. So this is where I would like to end, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Oras. And this is actually, let me now find my way in my papers. This is actually when we are going to leave Helsinki for a while. We'll take a break in this connection between our two hubs. And we say goodbye to Helsinki. We'll see you in about 30 minutes. You will have a discussion there. We will have a discussion here in Glasgow. And then we connect again. So Annika, you continue there. And we will continue here in Glasgow. And now I am going to ask Mr. Magnus Ek to chair a tour de table here in Glasgow. You have approximately half an hour at your disposal. The last 5 minutes we will reserve for Finnur Rikard Andersson, who is Iceland's youth delegate to the climate discussions here. Finnur is there. He will tell you what he has heard you say and make like an update of the discussions. Then we will continue together with Helsinki. So please have a nice and fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much. And the pleasing thing about this is that we have a bit more time than I expected us to have. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for being here. We have parliamentarians from all the Nordic countries, from the European Parliament, and here from Scotland as well, which we're, I was about to say especially pleased, we're at least very pleased about that. I don't want to talk down my Nordic colleagues. We also have Paula Lehtomäki and Gudmundur Ingi Gudbrandsson, the Icelandic Minister for Climate Affairs.
Environment, yes.
Environment, yes. And I was going to say that I might extend a bit less time to you two as you're speaking later.
He needs a hand mic.
But we have some more time right now, so I think we'll be managing to afford everyone time to speak. We are doing a roundtable. Apparently my microphone isn't really working that well, but I'm hoping that you all hear me now. At least I can hear myself. We are going to have a roundtable discussion or a tour de table without a table, but I'm hoping that we can manage that anyway. And the theme for this roundtable discussion is that in light of the global report on climate change from the IPCC, which we have heard Oras talking about, thank you so much, Oras, for that, have politicians, and especially Nordic politicians, responded with necessary urgency? And I'm very interested to hear your takeaways on have we done enough? Have we reacted in the correct manner? And how will we, or should we, react? And how should we proceed from the point in time where we are right now? And I think I'm not going to take a strict tour de table, but I would like to jump between all of you to kind of mix things up. But if I look at Ola Elvestuan, would you like to start?
I can. Thank you. I can start. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Or maybe not. Okay. I can use this one. Thank you very much. If you have done enough, I think it's clear to say, but you see how serious the situation is. Clearly, it is true that Nordic countries is I think has done a lot, and it's ahead if you compare to where we were a few years ago. But if you look at the IPCC report and where we need to be with the seriousness that we're in and how much we need to do just the next 10 years, obviously we have not done enough. I think we have set our own goals. I mean, if you look at Denmark, it's a 70% reduction by 2030. Norway has said 55% reduction by 2030. But the plans are not there yet to reach them. So that, I think, where parliamentarians have to come in, is to take that decision how to move forward. And the other part where I think really the Nordic countries need to cooperate, and we do cooperate, but we need to cooperate more, is to take a larger international responsibility. You had the pledges on rainforests that came just last week. We've had the pledges that was mentioned also on reducing methane. But there too, you have to work much harder on a broader spectrum internationally. And I think the Nordic countries are especially situated to do that. And together with the UK or Scotland that also are in the same position. So that I think is, we have a good start, but the situation is moving so fast and the news are so bad that it obviously it has been much, much more in the years ahead.
I think we can pass the microphone because Simon waved here, so I'll forward the word to Simon. But before that, I will say that I missed out the most important piece of information. I've been given very strict instructions that we restrict ourselves to 1 minute. So Simon, you have your minute.
Thank you for that. I think we have we're talking quite much in the Nordics about all these reduction goals by 2030, 55, 60, climate neutral. We have a declaration from 2019, a Helsinki Declaration on carbon neutrality, which hasn't got any goal, which hasn't got any definition. I think what we have to understand here is a missing mechanism also in the Paris Agreement, the end of the fossil fuels. I mean, we have to end the usage and the exploitation of fossil fuels. And as we've heard, that is actually the concrete thing that we can do as politicians. Not just discuss the definitions about climate neutrality and the goals, but really to set targets. When do we end the use of coal, natural gas, and so on? Because that will force us to understand exactly what the transition means to renewables, to less energy consumption, because that is actually what is needed. So we have been driving the issue from the Nordic Council perspective. It has been voted down with 9-7 in a committee. I'm utterly disappointed at the Nordic Council for that. But now we have another issue going on, which is Nordic Alliance for the Climate, where all the countries together actually discuss what our joint goals are, because we haven't got any definition and any common stance on the end of the usage of fossil fuels. Denmark has this new alliance, this BOGA alliance, which I'm utterly glad for, and I'm hoping that the Nordic countries also can be included in that.
Thank you, Simon. And since we don't know all each other's names, I would love for you to just say very briefly who you are and what your position is. We heard from Simon Hagström from Ålands Lagting, Holmström, sorry, and from Ola Elvestuen from Norway's Stortinget. But please.
Me?
I think we'll take your neighbor first, if that's okay.
And then can I speak as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Minutes.
So my name is Kristrún Frostadóttir, Kristrún, and I'm a recently elected member of parliament for the Social Democratic Alliance in Iceland. So this is the first COP that I have been to, but I have been very much impacted by being here. I mean, obviously, I follow news, you read through policies, but there's a different kind of energy in being in this spot. You get to listen to views of, for example, underdeveloped and poor countries, which has been very impactful for me, because they're basically telling us, listen, you richer countries are focusing a lot on mitigation. We're focusing on adaptation because we're living through climate change right now. And they've also been speaking a lot about funding. Obviously, we need to do our part because we are richer nations. We have the resources to support these countries. This is our obligation because these people are living through our emissions right now. But it brings me maybe to sort of the point what we can do for our own countries when it comes to funding. Obviously, I'm driven by sort of my politics, which is a strong social safety net. And I think we have to think about it twofold. It's strengthening our social safety nets because we know that this transition is going to be difficult for a large number of people. And if we don't want to have a political backlash when it comes to changing our consumption patterns, job patterns, we need to make sure as Nordic countries that have been at the forefront of welfare states, that these are well-funded systems. But I would also like to encourage, given that I'm currently in opposition, our Minister for Climate Affairs, which is sitting here, to put more money into this category because it is not enough that's going into it. And at the end of the day, money speaks. This is what we need to fund climate technologies. So thank you.
Thank you. I think I'd like to shake things up by passing the floor to Jakob Dalunde from the European Parliament, and then we'll return to this side of the room.
Thank you very much, Magnus. Listening to, my name is Jakob Dalunde, member of the European Parliament for the Greens. Listening to Oras speak about the latest Ipcc report, my memory came back from 2006, listening to his fellow countryman Marko Rummukainen, who was then chief meteorologist at the Swedish Institute of Meteorology, presenting the fourth Ipcc report. And at that point, it was his conclusion that we have emitted enough carbon into the atmosphere so that the PPI level was at that time already so high that even if we would cut our emissions to zero in 2006, we would still have escalating climate change for 500 years more. And since then, emissions have increased quite a bit. So I take issue with this very concept of if we're doing enough or not, if we can save climate change or not. Climate change is here, it's irrevocable, and we need to shift our mindset to not save it or not, but how much can we save? How many degrees will we have? And that mindset, I think, is much more approachable to citizens. Most citizens psychologically cannot deal with can we save it or not, because that needs to inaction. It leads us to think, well, it's over, we cannot solve it. But if we shift our mindset to saving as much as possible and doing as much as we can and not saying, well, China's not doing enough, so I'm not going to do anything. And if we instead think, what can Sweden do? What can Norway do? What can the Nordics do? What can Europe do? That takes us to a much better place.
Thank you, Jakob. I think I'll pass the microphone to Bryndis, who requested the word. And perhaps if you'd like to respond, or if you would just like to respond with your views on the previous discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Bryndis Haraldsdóttir, and I'm a member of the Icelandic Parliament. I'm also a member of the West Nordic Council, so I work a lot with Greenland and Faroe Islands. And to put up all my hats, I also am a special representative for Arctic issue for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. So I also wanted to mention another report regarding the Arctic issues. We have talked a lot about what is going on in the world, and I just spoke with a former president of Maldives, which are sinking, but we are Arctic nations, and there are so many things going on in the Arctic. There, the warmth is 3 times more than in the globe. So as an Arctic nation, we really have to step it up. And the question is, are we doing enough? No, of course we're not doing enough, but I think that the Nordic Council are doing quite a lot, and I think there's a lot of opportunity also in speaking out about what we are doing, science, innovation, and seeing how the business life in the Nordic nation is taking part of that, being part of the sustainable future, the future we want to live in. And I think also I want to be a little bit optimistic in that sense, that we can do it as a Nordic nation, and we should step forward.
Thank you. If we can get a phone to Paula Lehtomäki. I think we do Paula, Annette, and then perhaps hear from our Scottish...
Thank you. So my name is Paula Lehtomäki. I'm Secretary General for the Nordic Council of Ministers. And yes, to the question, have we done enough? Certainly not. It is extremely important that we do our homework both at home and globally. And at home, okay, we have very ambitious climate targets, but we have to admit that we have huge challenges in consumption-based climate footprint because of the very high level of our living standards. And that is something that we are focusing on much more now, but that is really something we have to work with a lot. And it's about time very much to focus on finding solutions and then scaling them up also globally. I would like to thank this adaptation dimension that came up in the discussion, because I think that on the common Nordic agenda it has not been so strong. So this is certainly something that we need to look at too.
Thank you so much, Paula. Annette.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking as a Dane now, not a Nordic political. Yeah. Do you hear me? Yeah. Denmark was mentioned several times, and I think it's very important to say that we in Denmark made a political act in 2019 where we were discussing how to reduce CO2, and we made a political act with 70% in 2030. And I think we are in the green jersey in Denmark. I think we have a lot of wind power, we have a lot of solar power, and in my part of the country, which is the western part of Jutland, we have Vestas and we have a lot of solar energy. We have more than we can use, and we are selling to another country, mostly Germany, and we made so much solar power and wind power that we cannot sell it all because it's too much for Germany. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. I think we'll pass the floor to our Scottish host here. I didn't catch your name, so please introduce yourself if we could get a microphone down there.
Thank you very much. My name is Dean Lockhart. I'm a member of the Scottish Parliament. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm also chair of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee at the Scottish Parliament, which has responsibility for monitoring the Scottish Government's climate change targets. Scotland has set a target to reach net zero by 2045 with a 75% reduction by 2030. There is cross-party consensus in the Scottish Parliament. All parties agree with those targets, which I think is a very important starting point. How we get there is obviously a challenge. In the Parliament, the main, as a parliamentarian, the main focus for the Parliament is transparency of government policy, transparency of budgetary spend towards net zero. We're asking the government to, when they produce their budget, to identify what is core spending and what is spending towards net zero targets. We also need to have commonly agreed measurements, commonly agreed targets, so that as parliamentarians and as stakeholders we can agree what the targets are, how the targets are measured, and progress towards those targets. And I won't take much longer, but one of your colleagues mentioned the role of the private sector. I think that's very, very important. I think we've reached an inflection point where the private sector recognise the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action. And frankly speaking, no government in the world has a balance sheet big enough to finance the transition to net zero. An announcement last week was the Glasgow Financial Alliance Network, which identified up to $130 trillion available to be mobilised for climate change across the world. And as parliamentarians, I think we really need to make sure that finance is mobilised and it goes to the developing nations as well as part of a wider international just transition to net zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. And I'm going to leave the floor to the Icelandic Minister in just a bit, and then to some of our other colleagues here. If I might just kick in a couple of questions. One that I promised a colleague in the committee and the Nordic Council to ask. How do we balance these, I mean, what we do nationally, what we do in the Nordic, with what we do in the wider world? I mean, all the Nordic countries are quite invested in, for example, climate financing, in climate aid, and in climate-friendly foreign aid and developmental aid. And do you think there is a conflict there, or is it simply that we should be doing more of everything? I mean, we've heard that it is a good thing just to save every ton of carbon dioxide that we can save from not releasing into the atmosphere is a positive. But do you think there is some form of dichotomy there. And also, should we be spending more on climate financing? That is a big question these days at COP26. And I'll just kick those questions out there. I know that you only have a minute or two, so I have full respect of you. I don't have time to answer, but I'll leave those questions hanging. Please, Minister. Can we have a microphone?
Oh, can I speak through that? Okay. I was just going to tell you that we had an outbreak in Iceland on the pandemic where people were singing in a karaoke, and I feel like we are a little bit doing that with the mic here, so I was ready to disinfect it. So anyways, but sorry, not to get you scared or anything. Well, I think my minute goes into, that is quite clear, the message, the science message is quite clear. The climate is warming, it's because of humans, and we need to get it right very fast. If we look at the Nordic region, we are good at some things and we need to be much better at other things. And what we are good at is that, for example, renewable energy technology is something that we have mastered quite well. And we are we are also doing quite well when it comes to the share of electric vehicles. If you look at the 5 countries that are at the top of importing electric vehicles, both plug-in hybrid as well as sort of clean electrics, all the 5 Nordic countries, they rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I mean, that is an accomplishment. And I'm not saying that so that we should brag about it, but we should use it as an example of how things can be done. And the most important thing here is, like Paula said, is to scale that up. Be an example to the world on that front and scale it up. The sectors that we really, really need to be working on now more intensively and sort of pave the way for further reductions is when it comes to fishing, when it comes to aeroplanes and traveling, and then agriculture. These are the 3 main sectors, in my opinion, that we need to take really big steps in the next 4 or 5 years so that we will have some milestones in 2030 and bigger milestones 5 and 10 years later. Thanks.
Thank you. And next on the speaker, Annika Hirvonen.
We have this saying, we want to lead by example. I think that is generally the most powerful way that the Nordic countries have impacted and will impact the world's climate emissions. We have the capacity to innovate solutions, both technical solutions as fossil-free steel production that is now happening in north of Sweden, but also social innovation and how we build society. I just passed this demonstration of bicyclists. I think that is one of the examples of how we can build a better society, at the same time reducing emissions, but also making people happier. And just to illustrate what I mean with making people happier, I want to tell you about a non-scientific study where they looked at what made people happy of everyday activities. Commuting to work was that which made people the most unhappy. You know, sitting in car lines, like queues. And most happy people were from having sex, which is very low emission activity. We're living in societies where a lot of people aren't happy. There is like mental health issues, stress-related issues, parents traveling to work, leaving their kids off at school in their cars and then sitting in these lines being unhappy. And we are now working for policy in Sweden to make sure that kids can take their own bikes to the schools, which will also increase their learning results, because people learn better if they move before the education starts. There are so many ways in which our policy to mitigate climate change will create better societies, because the meaning of life in the end is something else than those activities that are now devastating our planet. And there will always be things to save and fight for.
And if sex was a mode of transport, I'm sure that it would be a lot easier to make the transition away from fossil fuel cars. Next speaker, Andreas, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Andreas Ingi Jónsson, Member of Parliament from Iceland. I think we can all agree we haven't shown enough urgency, but we could maybe ask ourselves whether the reason is that we Nordics are really good at meeting each other and patting each other on the back for being really good at things. We need to lead by example, but we, in some cases, aren't. I would, however, like to mention our colleagues in Greenland, which are leading by example these days. The new government that came into power as one of its first tasks decided to ban further fossil fuel exploration, and yesterday they decided to ban uranium mining in their lands. These are very positive steps and apparently quite radical, because we in Iceland couldn't even get through Parliament a ban on fossil fuel exploration in a land that has no fossil fuel exploration. And then we have to address the fact that there cannot be any proper ambition on climate if we are still expanding fossil fuel exploration. And I'm looking at Norway here, especially.
Yeah.
I would like to, again, on a positive note, comment what Denmark is doing today, opening the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. That's a place where all of our countries should be. And I have to admit, I'm quite sad that Iceland won't be able to be there because the government didn't have the backbone in the spring to ban fossil fuel exploration in Iceland.
Ja, men vad bra. So for once, we actually have a bit more time than we expected, and I have a few people that would like to go in the second round. Before I let you all speak, I would just see if there is anyone that would want to speak that hasn't got the chance to speak. Then we'll take you first. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Linda Merkesdal, and I'm from Norway and the Labour Party. I'm at Stortinget, and this is my first COP and my first period at Stortinget. And I will thank you for the invitation. You were asking if we had a responsibility when we invest in funds, and I think we definitely have a responsibility where we put our money when we invest in funds. And I also will say that you were talking about the bicycles, and that's a good example how we make people take climate-friendly choices, and we have to help people to take climate-friendly choices, and it's the government who needs to help people to make it easy to take climate-friendly choices. And we also need that the government has good incentives to the industry, so the industry can take all the heat that they are letting out in the atmosphere to go back in the industry again. So we have a big case to do that. You were talking about the 1 ton that helps in every step we take, and small businesses and big businesses need the same incentives so they can take climate-friendly choices. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm terribly sorry, but I've missed Claire Baker, who's sitting behind me. But Claire, please.
Thank you. I'm Claire Baker. I'm a member of the Scottish Parliament, and I'm convener of the Economy and Fair Work Committee. This is the first time I've been to COP, and it's my first day here. It's really interesting to hear the discussion. As Dean said, we have ambitious climate change targets, but there are areas where we need to make significant progress. We have kept our targets on track, but it has been, the concern has been by doing the easier things. We did have closure of a big coal-fired electrical factory. That made a big impact, and that really helped. But other things have been the low-hanging fruit. Now we've got real challenges on transport, agriculture, and housing is a big issue in Scotland in terms of emissions from housing. But we do share the issues around energy, because Scotland has been an oil-producing country, and at the moment there's controversy about whether or not we give permission for another oil exploration to start. There's one, and some of us are arguing that we shouldn't start that we should not take any further oil exploration forward. And I think, you know, the same as other countries here, it's been an important part of our economy, and it's how do we go forward in our energy policies, and what do we have a sustainable energy policy that replaces what we've previously relied on? That's a huge challenge for all of us here today.
Thank you, Claire. And that actually is a very good transition to another question I'd like to just pose before I let the second round of speakers in. We want to lead by example. Also in the Nordics, we've done some of the easy, we've had some of the easy wins. This is when transition gets hard, and 2030 is just around the corner. Do you think we will manage, and how will we manage to reduce our emissions and rapidly reduce our emissions? I have Paula, then Ola, Annette, and Simon.
Yeah, thank you. I would actually like to answer to your previous question, that how do we balance? What do we do on a national level? What do we do on the Nordic level? Because this is the question we are very much working on. And last year we conducted an analysis that what are the most potential areas for cooperation here, because it's important that we are efficient now, that we find the common solutions. And then, for example, green transport, power to X, CCS, land use, and consumer level, those were identified as the very potential areas of cooperation. Now we have to have the courage to trust that together we are stronger, as we used to say, and to continue investing on this area of cooperation in order to be able to deliver more and deliver faster.
Yeah.
Ola.
Can you hear me with this?
Yep.
Yes. First of all, yes, we have to cut all fossil fuels, everything, by 2050, everything. So that is one, and I think Norway, when it comes to electric cars, etc., has been in front of that. Internationally, we have to do much more, whether it's preserving our rainforests. For Norway, it's also with a sovereign wealth fund. It should set its goals to become zero emission or climate neutral in its investments also, and that should be done. But then, of course, with Norway, there's always a discussion also with the oil and gas and the production. And I was put the attention to two reports that we made this year, apart from the Ipcc report. Because we had that I think is very important. It's an IEA report from this spring that says that to reach the 1.5 degree target, you cannot have more exploration. And you have the production gap report from the UNEP that says that with the finds that we have and the planned production, it can only be produced half to reach the 1.5 degree. And what that starts, and for Norwegian parties will have differences of it. But it starts the debate on oil from both ends, just as we have on coal. That is, it has to reduce the demand for it, and everyone has to really put up. Everyone has to do that. But we also have to see how do you plan if you do not, if you cannot, with the rest of the world, take out more than half. What is planned production? That is a debate that's just started. Some of us want us to stop exploration. That is a disagreement. But it will be a debate that will become stronger in the years ahead. And it's really a huge change that's come just this year.
Now you're starting to behave like politicians here. I'm having increasing difficulties keeping you on time. Very good remarks, Ola. Annette, and then we take Simon.
Yeah, and how to get further. I think it's very important that we develop new technologies, especially power to X, because we have no chance now to store energy as we could. But then again, it's important that it's not enough in ourselves. I think it's important that we do political agreements with other countries, especially as we have done with India. We have made the first climate agreement with India, and as Modi said, we have the majority of people and we have the big scale and you have the technology. And I think it's very important that we do those political agreements with majority of countries in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Simon, can we have a microphone for Simon?
Thank you so much. Of course, we are very proud of all the ambitious targets, the climate targets from the Nordic Council, from Nordic countries, but also, like jointly, the declarations and so on. Of course, we are very proud of the proliferation of our good techniques and our innovations from the different countries and so on. But will that be enough? No, it will not be enough. Alluding to what Paula said about the consumption, we have still a welfare system in the Nordics. We talk about the welfare system, very proud of that, which is financed by overconsumption, exploiting natural resources, exploiting human resources in the world. And if not politicians understand the conflict of endless economic growth and reaching these targets, we're not going to see any progress when it comes to reaching the 1.5 Celsius degree target. We're not going to come there. We have to understand that overconsumption is the root cause of the issues faced here, and politicians then also have to go into the hard matters, as you all was talking about. We have to legislate, to curb and to limit and to form the market conditions, new market conditions for fossil-free future. That means ending exploitation and also ending the use of fossil fuels.
Thank you, Simon. And I think this might be our last speaker, but Krista, right? What's that? Huh?
Kristrun.
Kristrun, I'm so sorry.
No, don't
Please.
worry about it. I'm used to it. So I wanted to just put out a word of encouragement. The Nordics were leaders when it came to promoting a different market structure, the welfare system, the welfare state. Everyone looks to us. Now we're entering a new future. We have the income per capita to make these hard decisions. If we can't do it, make a more climate-friendly market structure, we can't expect other countries which are dealing with much more difficult social circumstances to do this. Us as politicians, people don't like to say this, but we are the ones who make the markets. The markets don't come from above. They're constructed by rules, regulations, laws. We're the ones who set these laws. So I think the biggest thing that we can do now is become role models and leaders in driving a sort of whole of economy greening. Because if we continue at the same rate, just tinkering around the edges, and we don't set the stage, nobody else will follow. So this is just an encouragement to all of us to realize how much effect we can actually have. We are the ones who make the system that we all follow. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We won't be hearing from Gudmundur now, but he will be back to speak later in the day. And I just wanted to thank you all for this discussion. And as a final closing word, I'm also involved very heavily in developmental aid policy. And I ask you all not to forget that we have a long and proud history from all the Nordic countries when it comes to that. And that is such an important issue also when we're talking about how to reduce climate emissions, but also how to manage climate change. And we all know that those who are the most poor and those who are already live on the harshest conditions will be hit the hardest. So with that rather bleak note, I will thank you for a good discussion. And we will now hear from Finnur Rikard Andrason, who is the UN Youth Delegate on Climate from Iceland. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very nice opportunity to get to speak here and listen to all of you here. I'm a believer of constructive collaboration, so first of all, just getting people like you all in the same circle discussing with each other is a big first step. I've been listening carefully, and I have 4 main points that I've taken away from this. The first one is that we need to include consumption-based emissions in our emission profiles. Transitioning to low emission or low carbon economies means deindustrialization. That's a fact. So if we're going to transition to low carbon economies, it doesn't work to keep our consumption at the same rates. The industrialization will move elsewhere, and the net emissions will not reduce at all. So that's one of the big things, including our consumption-based emissions in our emission profiles and really taking them seriously. Secondly, coming back to my opening remark was about collaboration. I think the Nordic countries, as was mentioned, have a long history of collaborating with each other, and I think that's really powerful. So I think we need to go even further with that regards. We have very diverse targets among the Nordic countries, some more ambitious than others. And I think rather than comparing ourselves constantly, we need to start learning from each other. We have Iceland having 2040 as carbon neutrality, Finland another, Denmark a different target for emission reductions, different approaches, different ways to get there. But I think some are better than others, and we need to start realizing which ones are the best and which ones should be sort of set as common targets, because we have this common vision of being the most sustainable, most integrated region in the world, so we must start acting more together. My third point is on integrating climate action and improving society. So that was a point that I took away from this, and it's big on a topic that's very prevalent here, is the just transition. And as much as it's talked about, I think very little is being done on going beyond talking about just transition and going beyond talking about the co-benefits of a low-carbon economy, of a more futuristic society. So really putting those words into action is something that I want to see a lot more of. And to my fourth and last point is actually not about what I heard, but about what I didn't hear. As a young person in the conversation, I heard nothing about how youth is going to be involved in the conversation. I want politicians like you to recognize that we and future generations are the main stakeholder in this issue. So we need you to start recognizing us as a stakeholder, including us in the decision-making process, and putting us into the legislation. And I think just as collaborating and rethinking consumption is a matter of engaging our values, extending our collective empathy to us, young people, and future generations is a massive step that we need to take. So I want to leave you with that thought and hope you sort of take away from the conversation what you've said and put it into your actions. Thank you.
And with that, let's see if I'm on. With that, this concludes the part where we are only in Glasgow. I am not 100% sure that they are ready for us in Helsinki just yet, because we had like 2 minutes before schedule. But I want to thank you all. Magnus for keeping this discussion like a whole. I don't know where Magnus is, but he had to leave. But the rest of you for having a good discussion, and you for reminding all of us of what we need to remember, in addition to what you do remember already. And now I can see that we have Helsinki with us. Let's see if they can hear us as well. I'll put on my headphones. Annika, can you hear me now?
Yes, hello, I can hear you.
Oh, very good. I hope you had a good discussion as we did here in Glasgow. Could you please now bring over the main messages from your discussion in Helsinki?
Yes, and we really had an interesting discussion here in Helsinki with our youth panel, and many important topics were raised. Some of them I will now transfer to you so that you can get back to us on those. We talked about what the Nordic countries can do, some initiatives that can be done. And one thing that was mentioned was setting a date, or basically agreeing when to stop using fossil fuels. And we also need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels and allow finances to go into green energy instead. In the Nordics, we also have a problem with consumption. We need to decrease the consumption, but also bear in mind the things that can be done when it comes to trade to also ensure social sustainability, and not only in the Nordics, but also in the global south. So we need to also have the north-south perspective in mind, and that was also mentioned, and share skills and knowledge also to other countries from the Nordics. That were some initiatives that can be done by the Nordic countries. We also talked about how we can communicate better when it comes to climate change, and how to take into account also biodiversity. So we discussed a lot of different topics. And one thing that was mentioned was that we need to bear in mind social sustainability and the social reconstruction, and also helping those that are affected by changes due to what we need to do for the green transition. So providing education, providing solutions for those that are affected and might even, for example, lose their jobs. We need to bear the intersectional perspective in mind when we are communicating on climate change. And we talked about how not to focus on the individual level too much, but also remember to put more responsibility on governments and businesses that have more resources to commit to the change faster. We also talked about education. It has a key role and can provide a holistic perspective when it comes to learning more about climate change and moving away from the black and white perspectives that can sometimes cause polarization. That was a really interesting point that was brought up by the panel. Governments can do more to include youth in decision-making nationally, and the government should also connect better to civil society. And we discussed also some topics surrounding youth inclusion, and that is definitely an area where we can still improve, and also, of course, taking in mind other groups such as indigenous peoples. And of course, we also need to bear in mind biodiversity. And when we are designing solutions for climate change, biodiversity should also be on our minds, and resource use, for example, that should be something that we are also concerned about, and how we can come up with solutions that better both biodiversity and moving away from disastrous climate change. Yes, I think that were some of the main points.
That was really a lot, and you used the time you had at your disposal very well, I must say. Now is the time for reflections, and I have with me here on stage now Gudmundur Ingi Gulbrandsson, your Minister for Environment and National Resources in Iceland, and Paula Lehtomäki, Secretary General at the Nordic Council of Ministers. What are your initial thoughts, let's put it that way, when you have heard your own discussion, but mostly now please react to what you heard from Helsinki.
Yeah, it's great to be with you all, both here in Glasgow as well as in Helsinki. What I'm really happy to hear in the discussion now, which is a change from what we had, well, basically only 2-3 years ago, is that biodiversity is finally being incorporated into the discussion of climate change. Because these two are so interlinked that they cannot be separated. And policymakers, they have to remember this. They have to understand why this is important. And it is important because biodiversity is the building blocks of life. It is what we, it is really where we get shelter, food, etc., all kinds of other services when it comes to flooding and droughts, etc., and has to be kept in mind. So I believe that one part of that discussion has been brought forward by young people, at least at home in Iceland. They have been the ones who have actually put that in the front, at the front. And I want to thank for that, and I absolutely agree with it. Now, I also want to comment on education. I think education is really important and a part of how we communicate not only about climate change, but all environmental issues. It is, for someone like me who has been in the environment sector my whole career, it has been really encouraging to see what has happened in the last 5 years. And from Paris and until now in Glasgow, both on the international as well as national levels, it is really amazing. However, we are still lacking to communicate these issues in an easy and a more understandable way. And I sometimes you know, it's sometimes really good to talk to your mother and ask her, so Mom, how do you see these things and that things? And she will always tell me, well, I don't understand this, I don't understand that, and I don't understand why you don't talk about this and that. So I'm gonna give you this little advice to all of us, that let's talk to our moms or whoever it is who is close to us, trust us, and is in a position to tell us off in a kind way. Because communication is essential if we want to get the people with us. And that is important and essential when it comes to taking these issues further. Just one more point, and that goes on basically the interplay between governments and the private sector. I think one of the things that have changed since 2015 in Paris is that the private sector is more and more involved now. They are stepping up their game, as well as governments, or most governments are doing, and governments can't do this alone. And I absolutely agree with those who have said governments need to make the rules. And I was attending a dinner last night where a very influential businessman said, we need a price on carbon. Because once we have a price on carbon, then the business will find ways to make it as cheap as possible to get where we need to get. And I agree on that we need price on carbon.
Okay, Paula.
Thank you, and I would like to express my thanks also to the panel in Helsinki. I'm very grateful for your input, and I'm delighted actually some of the points that came up in your discussions. I am very happy to see that this consumption issue is coming through now so strongly. I'm happy because I also think that it will be a little bit painful discussion for us, because it is a big part of our climate footprint, but we are continuing working on it. Then north-south perspective, that is of course very important, and that is something we also discussed here. Nordic countries are big players on development cooperation field, and we also have a common Nordic tool, Nordic Development Fund, on this area, and they are mostly focusing just on climate adaptation related issues. So it's important to use the tools that we have the most efficient way. Then social sustainability, just to mention that it has been very important dimension in climate discussions among the Nordic prime ministers. So in that sense there is a strong political backing behind that. And then focus on businesses. This is extremely important in our common Nordic work, because businesses also tend to look at the other businesses as competitors, but we need to provide them with the platforms that they can learn from each other, that they can combine their forces as well. So this is an important part of our work, and I'm very grateful to hear that message from you. And including youth is extremely important, and that is great that you have been in the panel today, and we shall all together continue on taking care of that you are included.
And actually, we will, now I can't see Helsinki there, but there you are. We have just a few minutes left of this event, and we have the opportunity for you to have a short dialogue with the youth in Helsinki. Annika, who would like to comment on what you just heard from Gudmundur and Paula, or have you got some other comments for us?
Yes, we have a question from the panel actually, so I will give the floor to you.
Can you hear? Yeah. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Aðalbjörg, and I'm from Iceland. So what I wanted to ask, one of the points that we discussed, is that what does the pledge that the Nordic Prime Ministers made in 2019 to be the most sustainable region in the world by 2030, what does it mean? Because what we need right now and have needed for a few years is not more empty words, but action. And where is that action? What does it mean?
Okay, which one of you wants to start? This is a fairly big question. Would you start, Gudmundur?
Yeah, sure, I can start. Thanks, Albjörg. Good to see you. Well, I understand that, and I'm coming from there myself, that people sometimes get frustrated when things don't happen fast enough. And I'm on that team as well. But what a pledge like that means is really that the policy making that takes place in the Nordic countries has to take this into account. And in my opinion, that is really, really important. And that the Prime Ministers said that we are going to reach carbon neutrality as soon as possible also meant that we started analyzing in what ways are we doing that. And we know that we are doing that in different ways. And that means that we can also learn from each other on how to reach those goals. So I think those 2 points are important, but mostly that a pledge like that, a statement like that, means that we can also be held accountable for what we said and what we signed. And that's an important power that, for example, you guys have to hold us accountable. And as an important power that any parliamentarian, we have a lot of them here in Glasgow, can hold against our governments. And that is important for us to know that you are there to push us and to remember that we are making pledges that we are supposed to keep up to.
Yeah, what does it mean, the vision for the cooperation? It means that if you ask that what is important in the Nordic cooperation, you have 2 words, sustainability and integration. That is what is important. What does it mean? It means in very, very practical terms that we are putting much more resources, also money, in Nordic cooperation on green transition during these years. And what does it also mean is that we have now introduced also 45 Nordic indicators to follow up the development in the Nordic area. So it is the purpose that we also can see the consequences of this target in very concrete work, and that work is going on.
Do you have more questions?
Yes, we have one more question from the panel.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad that this discussion went into the biodiversity issues, and something I feel that at least in Finland and maybe in the other Nordic countries as well, we often have this thought that our nature is doing so well, that our nature is so clean and so perfect and nothing needs to be done. For example, our president was in COP early last week talking about how great our forestry is in Finland and how everyone should come to Finland to learn about our forestry. But the fact is that even though we have a lot of forests in Finland, only 5% of our forests are natural forests. And our biodiversity is declining as well. I think we need to shake ourselves up to understand that we have a nature crisis as well in the Nordic countries. Our nature is not doing as well as it should be. So.
Did you have a question?
Please take action for nature.
But no question. It was more of a comment, was it?
More of a comment, yes.
Yeah. Gudmundur wants to react to that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Like I said to you before, I think this is one of the things where we have advanced in the discussion in the last years. This was one of the things that the Climate Summit in New York in 2019, I think, discussed. This new term sort of nature-based solutions. This is all about conserving biodiversity and protecting our nature. I'm going to give you a more I'm going to give you a number because you mentioned a number which was 5%. What has happened in Iceland since settlement of the island is that over 95% of our original forest is gone. So we have a huge task in restoring that ecosystem so that we will get somewhere near to what was there before. So I just absolutely agree with you that we can't separate the climate issue from biodiversity. It's really, really important. I also wanted to mention one more thing, if I may, because Finnur mentioned here before, when he was wrapping up from the discussion of the parliamentarians, something that he missed from the discussion, and that is how we are going to include youth. Having worked for an environmental NGO back in Iceland before I entered politics, I know where you're coming from, Finnur, because I often felt the same, that NGOs weren't involved enough. I had the opportunity some 7 years ago or something to participate in a committee at the Ministry for the Environment that was preparing lawmaking on environmental impact assessment. And I believe that one of the most influential ways of including NGOs, young people, is to get them at the table at the early beginning of policy making. And that is something that I've tried as a minister to do, at least in some cases. And the second thing I want to mention about this is, very short, is that the Nordic Council of Ministers had a resolution from the Parliament, the Nordic Parliament, on creating a fund for youth. I know Paula knows more about this. Maybe you could tell us very shortly. No, you cannot. So there is a fund in the making. Okay, bye.
Okay, I'm sorry, but the time is up now. We can't take any more comments now. I want to thank Gudmundur and Paula for being here. I also want to thank all of you in Helsinki, the fine panel, and Annika. I want to thank all the parliamentarians who took part in the discussions, and Oras, who presented the Ipcc report for us. Thank you very much for this discussion, and we will be continuing the discussion during the day. Thank you.